So 13.1 sample space. So on Friday we went over sample space. We kind of went over the basics of probability. Remember that our sample space is just this, all possible outcomes of something. So that's our sample space. And we can ask the question, what are some examples of situations where we know all sample possible outcomes? For instance, in a coin toss, there's like heads or tails. So there's put an H for heads, T for tails. Or for the roll of a die, six-sided die, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Or for a letter grade, A through F, and you can do pluses and minuses and all that stuff. So all those possible options. So they're all the possible outcomes when you're considering something. So when I consider a coin toss, there are two possible outcomes. Roll of a die, 6. Letter grade, there would be A through F, so 7 or 6, and then the plus or the minus or not, so it'd be like 18 total possibilities, but I'm not going to write all that out. So now an event, remember we covered, is an outcome or it's a set of outcomes. So an outcome might be that I roll a die and I roll a 3. Or a set of outcomes is I roll a die on the first try and I get a 3, and then I roll a die on the second try and I get a 4 or something. So multiple outcomes constitute an event. So if we flip a coin 3 times, what are the possible outcomes? So we have, in a coin toss, we have two possible outcomes if we flip it once, right? Heads or tails. So we can show this in a tree diagram. My first toss is here. I can get heads or tails. Okay, so let's say on the first toss I get a heads. Well, on the second toss I can get heads or tails here. Let's say I get tails. Then on the third toss I can get heads or tails, and let's say I get heads. So that might be one possible path the outcomes can take. But in total, this is our sample space, right? So this here is kind of like our first toss. This here is our second toss. And this here is our third toss. Yes?
I have no idea what you're talking about.
Okay, so like I said, we've been talking about sample spaces. And that's all the possible outcomes of something, right? So when I have a coin toss, the possible outcome of a coin toss is heads or tails.
Yeah.
So the question is, if we flip a coin 3 times, what are the possible outcomes? So if I flip the coin once, here's my first toss, I can get heads or tails, right?
Yeah.
One of these two. This is just showing you with the tree diagram. Let's say I get heads, so I land on heads. Then I have a second toss, in which case my options are either heads or tails here. Oh, I can't really see that, sorry. Heads or tails here. I could roll, I could toss tails, let's say. And then my third toss, see it branches out here, I have two more options, heads or tails. Let's say I roll heads, toss heads. What's that? Yeah, either way you're going to have heads or tails. So this is just a way of mapping out the sample space. So if you flip a coin 3 times, this is a way of presenting all the possible outcomes that could ever happen when you do that. But ultimately, when you toss that coin, it's going to follow kind of one of these paths. Okay, are there any more juniors here? Sorry, not asking you, I'm asking the class. Okay, well then that's all we have then.